Okay, so as I said, the rubric is your first destination for revision, okay? It literally is what you're being marked according to. So if you're really, really, really familiar with the rubric and you know everything about the rubric, you know the ins and the outs, obviously you're going to do well. Okay, so no matter what classwork you have done or the number of amazing examples you have in your quote bank, if you don't examine the rubric, you won't be able to succeed in the HSC, right? As I just said, your marker is marking you through the lens of the rubric, okay? So if you don't address the rubric, you can't succeed. It also helps because it narrows the task of revising and studying to a more manageable amount. Work smarter, not harder, okay? Don't try to study everything for a text. Only study what's relevant according to the rubric. So let's kind of have a recap of your Module A rubric, language, identity, and culture. Okay, basically, all of this can be summarized by saying that language is used by composers to comment on people's identities and people's culture. And that has an effect on readers' perception of these identities, of these cultures, and their own identities and cultures. Okay, so just to recap that, just so we're all kind of familiar with what the rubric's actually asking. The rubric is asking, how is language being used by a composer to shape, mold, or reflect certain identities and cultures? And how does that affect the perception of these identities and cultures to the audience and their own experience with their own identities and cultures? Okay. So, are there any key phrases that we should? Yeah. So really, it's kind of this part here. Generally, when you have like a rubric, the first part of it will be the conceptual stuff, and then this is mostly just about like you will be responding in the form of an essay. So just to kind of recap, just to refresh ourselves, the rubric says, language has a power to both reflect and shape individual and collective identity. In this module, students consider how their responses to written, spoken, audio, and visual text can shape their self-perception. They also consider the impact texts have on shaping a sense of identity for individuals and or communities. Through their responding and composing, students deepen their understanding of how language can be used to affirm, ignore, reveal, challenge, or disrupt prevailing assumptions and beliefs about themselves, individuals, and cultural groups. Okay, basically that kind of just recaps everything that I just said. Obviously, the big idea, and I'll touch on this as we go through Module A more and more, but the big idea is there needs to be some link between language, identity, and culture in your text. What is how is a composer using language, and what does that say about a particular identity or a particular culture or both? Okay, that's a very first thing that needs to be present in your essay. What that link is in particular will be your thesis, and it should change depending on the question. So I could say, language is used in my text to mold a new identity, mold a new identity by demonstrating an individual who belongs to many cultures. Something like that, okay? I've spoken about how language is being used and its effect on identity and culture. Now, you could have a completely different link. You could have that language is being used in this particular way, whatever the way is, to challenge assumptions about cultures and individual identities, okay? Completely different. It's just important that you have a link in your essay, which will be your thesis. Okay, so let's look at the key concepts and let's address it in revision mode. So what is language? It's a system of words, images, and sounds in our communication, right? That's really, really easy. What's sometimes not so easy is understanding what language is in an essay. So obviously language is words, right? Language is also, if you're someone that's watching a film, like The Castle. Some of you may have studied The Castle this term. Language wouldn't just be the dialogue, right? It would also be the film techniques. Okay, that's also a part of language. So language is quite complex. And it also has both micro techniques and macro techniques. Hopefully that sounds a little bit familiar, but just in case it doesn't, and we'll touch on this more, but just in case it doesn't, micro techniques are our literary devices. Macro techniques are our form. Okay, micro only appear once. They're only on one particular page or one particular line. So if she was as fast as a tiger, you can see how that's just on page 12 of this novel, only appeared once, just there. That's a micro technique, right? It's our literary devices. Only appears once. Macro techniques appear all throughout your text. Okay, that's form. Things like setting. Setting happens all throughout the text. It's not just in one particular line on one particular paragraph on this page. It's all throughout. Costuming, if it's a film, because costuming usually spans across many scenes. Characterization, the way your character develops throughout your text. That is also form, right? Because development isn't just, again, on one line. It's all throughout the text. The type of structure that your text uses. So if you're someone that's studying a play and if there's many acts to the play. Okay, but moving on, identity is our sense of self and understanding of who we are. And then culture is our ways of life that contribute to our identity. Okay, obviously when we amalgamate many identities together, we start to form a culture. But when we spread out those individual differences between people in a culture, we start to look at identities. Okay, other key concepts that we need to be addressing. The idea of a perspective, which is different to perception. So perspective are the views that are manipulated and expressed within a text. However, perception is the interpretations that are gained outside of a text. Okay, I see these words kind of used synonymously in a lot of essays. They're not the same. A perspective is a worldview. Okay, whereas a perception is the way individual things are viewed based off worldviews, but other like biases. And then self-perception is how we view and understand ourselves. Okay, so people can share in perspectives. It's harder for people to share in perceptions because perception is really individual. It's linked to your worldview, but it's also linked to your individual experiences, your individual values and morals, and yeah, who you are as a person, your identity. Okay, the idea of individual and collective. This should also ring a bell from human experiences, right? Individual and collective identities. So when we define it, it's, referring to the people and groups represented in the text. Okay, the individuals and the collectives, the identities and the cultures. Beliefs and assumptions refer to views that we accept as truth and often without proof. Okay, and empathy is the ability to understand and share in the feelings of others. Okay, understand them. That's the biggest thing for empathy. So this is what's being used, language is being used to comment on this, identity and culture. This is what's also being shown, different perspectives of people. That's being shown to challenge our perception of these cultures or these identities or ourselves. And then this is also being shown to us, individual and collective. And then this is what's being challenged again, the beliefs and assumptions about particular identities and cultures, and also we're gaining empathy. Okay, please do not confuse empathy with sympathy. We do feel sorry for some of the characters that you've looked at, but what's more important is empathy. We understand them, because you can sympathize for someone but not understand them. The bigger thing is actually understanding someone. And just because you understand someone doesn't mean you actually sympathize for them.